good afternoon, and welcome to everyone that's joining us for the Robotics Roadmap for Australia 2025 edition. This is an information session that we're hosting today, and I'll be handing over to our Chair and Founding Director, Dr. Sue Keay, in a moment. I'd just like to take this opportunity to acknowledge our sponsors, which is, of course, Laing O'Rourke, Advanced Navigation, RSM Australia, and Vex Robotics. We could not do the work we do without your support. And to our growing list of network members, we've onboarded 4 new members in the last week or two. So thank you to everyone for their support. Absolutely fantastic to be working with you all. Sue, of course, is instrumental in getting these roadmaps together. So with that, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Nikki, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. So today I'm just going to outline the process that we're planning to go through to create another version of the Robotics Roadmap for Australia. And the reason that we're thinking of doing another roadmap is because hopefully very soon there will be a national robotics strategy for Australia. And so I think it's time that we reflect on where we are in terms of the adoption of robotics, but also where we would like to be, and really explore some of the opportunities for robotics that might come from the release of that national robotics strategy. So just to take you down a bit of a trip down memory lane to start with, I thought I would take you back to the very first Robotics Roadmap for Australia, which was released around mid-2018, when the Australian Centre for Robotic Vision was still in operation. And I apologise if you've already heard this story before, many of you may have, but just to give you the background about why this roadmap exists and what led to its creation. When the Australian Centre for Robotic Vision was operating and I was working there, it was very clear that we were developing great talent and technologies as part of the centre, but it was less clear where the talent and where those technologies were going to end up. And so a few people were able to tell me about some Australian robotics companies, but I was a little concerned that there seemed to be so little information about the robotics companies that existed in Australia, because from my background, which involves technology commercialization, it seemed to me that understanding the robotics companies that already exist in Australia would be a good way of understanding the mechanisms by which we could either be finding homes for the talent that was being produced, or even find ways to help commercialize the technologies that the researchers were producing. And so I thought, well, how is it that we can really understand the capability that exists in robotics in Australia? And I looked around and I noticed that a few other countries had developed these things called roadmaps and had a bit of a look at them. And I thought, well, this would be a really good idea. We were also very fortunate that at the Australian Centre for Robotic Vision at the time, one of our advisory board members was Professor Henrik Christensen from the University of California, San Diego. And he is the driver behind, I think they have 3 robotics roadmaps in the US, perhaps 4 now. And he credits the second version of that US robotics roadmap with direct investment from the US government of more than $100 million into robotics. And I thought, wow, well, that sounds like something that's definitely worth doing. Australia really should look to do the same thing. So I pestered Henrik. I got him to sort of break down the process by which they went about putting the US robotics roadmap together. And that really shaped how this first 2018 roadmap came together. We called a whole series of sort of consultation meetings where we focused on different sectors of the Australian economy and looked at how robotics were being applied to the benefit of those sectors. And also, as a result of putting that roadmap together, was really directly resulted in the formation of Robotics Australia Group. because in running these consultation sessions across the country, across different sectors, some of the messaging that we received from the people who are using robots were that they felt that Australia's robotics industry was immature, that it was fragmented, and that it was invisible. And I think in some ways, some of that is still true today. If you were to stop anybody in the street and ask them to name an Australian robotics company, you might be disappointed to discover that they find that not an easy thing to talk about. And obviously, you know, we're hoping that we can build a future where every Australian school child can name a robotics company that was created in Australia, and hopefully will aspire to work for one. So we formed Robotics Australia Group in May 2020 to be the voice for robotics in Australia, and really looking at representing, you know, the whole value chain, from the people that are building robots through to the people who are applying robots, through to the people who just love everything about robotics and want to be involved. And our main aim is to make sure that we have a sustainable robotics industry in Australia. And putting the roadmap together is one good way that we can highlight the capability that exists here in Australia. So I mentioned some of the key issues that we formed to address, obviously visibility, and also I think, you know, robotics has some brand issues where we want to make sure that people appreciate that robots don't necessarily mean job loss, and be able to put forward a more positive narrative about the benefits of robotics. We want to make sure that we're contributing to the growth of the robotics industry in Australia. We want to make sure that we're growing the connections around by developing this robotics network that Nikki has mentioned. And we also want to make sure that there is plenty of funding in the system to help support the growth of not just startups, but existing companies as well. And we formed deliberately as a national entity so that we could have that voice to government and representation, but we've always appreciated the benefit of having local robotics clusters where people can meet face to face and learn from one another. So I guess in the next stage of the evolution of Robotics Australia Group, that's where we're heading. We want to be able to make sure that we're supporting a lot more activities at the local level. So the very first 2018 roadmap was actually, I can show you, was quite a big document. However, actually compared to 2022, had fewer chapters, with the main focus being on the sectors listed here. In many cases, some of these sectors were quite large chapters. Services actually represents, I think, or employs 80% of Australia's population. So you can imagine there's actually quite a lot of context within that services chapter, which probably you know, could be broken out into multiple chapters. And also agriculture, environment and space. At the time, we spoke about all of them as if they were, because there are some similarities between the three, but we didn't actually break them up into separate chapters. But that was the way that we decided to structure things for the very first version of the roadmap. And then after 4 years, we decided that we would start working on another version of the roadmap. Actually, it wasn't 4 years, it was probably only 3 years in. During COVID, a lot of people might remember, we had a series of webinars looking at how we could update the roadmap. And we found that there are a lot of changes between the 2022 and the 2018 version of the roadmap. So some of those changes include that there was an additional $130 million in investment in robotics companies over that time, which is a good thing, because when we looked in 2018, there really wasn't a large amount of investment at all in robotics. We estimated that the value of robotics to the Australian economy had increased to around $18 billion per annum. We could see that there was an increasing number of mechatronics courses and also graduates. The roadmap process itself took on a whole new level of complexity. We went from only having 92 people participating in all of the workshops that we put together for the first roadmap to having more than 1,000 participants. putting together the second roadmap. And we went from having 58 case studies up to having 98 case studies, and we weren't even asking people for case studies at that point. So we were blessed with an abundance of information. And also, I think what this indicated was not just more of an awareness of the roadmap and it's the opportunity to be showcasing what's happening in Australia, but also it was reflecting an increase in the activity level in robotics. And as you're probably familiar, there have been a range of new robotics initiatives across Australia that have occurred during this time. Apart from the formation of Robotics Australia Group, we've seen the formation of various clusters, facilities, testing facilities for both robots and drones. And in general, as I said, I think the level of activity between the 2018 and 2022 roadmap has seen a great positive increase. Now, some of the extra chapters that we ended up adding in 2022, I guess we could say due to popular demand, include the ones listed here, and we separated out agriculture, environment, and space in their own right, but also gave drones more airtime and had specific chapters on both education and skills, which received a lot of uptake, and it was really very inspiring to see some of the amazing work that's being done in those areas. So yeah, very much looking forward to seeing how those chapters evolve when we look to put together the 2025 roadmap. So some of the potential new chapters that we are thinking of introducing for the 2025 roadmap would be first one, cab off the rank, will be around integrators, because I don't think that obviously the focus of Robotics Australia Group, has been very much on the creators of the robotics technologies, but we would like to make sure that we're also spending time talking about a lot of the companies that really fill in the gaps, that help to make sure that companies who are adopting robots are being supported, that they can navigate the confusion of the different technology choices that are out there and have successful implementations of robotics. So we want to have a dedicated robotics integrated chapter this year. Infrastructure kind of fell out of the last roadmap, and we're thinking perhaps of putting it in there again, because there is a lot of interesting work happening, particularly at our utilities in the robotics space. We've also had some interest in whether we should have chapters and maybe separate chapters on arts and sport, particularly with the Olympics coming to Australia in 2032. I think it would be really very useful to explore what are some of the opportunities for robotics in sport that we could showcase to the world during our Olympics. And something that didn't manage to get off the ground during the last roadmap, but I think is still very current, is around the use of robotics for emergency response or during natural disasters, and what that looks like, because, with climate change and with the intensity and frequency of disasters, robotics really can offer a lot of great solutions to those issues. Now, one of the things that will I guess in some ways inform whether and what type of chapters that we put together is really around participation and also sponsorship of these opportunities. So if we find that there is a whole bunch of interest in us having a chapter in arts and entertainment, in particular, if there is someone who is interested in sponsoring that chapter, then that's definitely an indicator to us that there is a genuine interest in us being able to explore that area and including it as part of the roadmap. So I encourage you to think about ways that you may be able to support the roadmap in terms of helping to sponsor or partnering with us on putting these chapters together. Now, one of the sort of headline figures that came out of the 2022 roadmap was a bit of a snapshot of what robotics looks like in Australia. And from that 2022 roadmap, we estimated that there are more than 1,000 companies who have robotics capability in Australia. And when I say robotics capability, that's a pretty broad term. So that's not just companies who are building robots. It might be companies who are integrators. It might be companies who do a whole bunch of other things, but as part of their business are also applying or building robots. So a good example of that would be a company like Boeing, which you would call an aerospace company, but is also manufacturing the Ghost Bat autonomous aerial vehicle, which I think is the first Australian designed and developed aeroplane for 50 years. So, you know, a lot of companies are doing really interesting things in the space of robotics, although they might not necessarily label themselves robotics companies. We estimate that these companies are employing more than 50,000 people, and that they're worth more than $18 in revenue to the Australian economy. And those numbers are important because until we did that very first robotics roadmap, if someone wanted to talk about the robotics industry in Australia, then it was very hard for them to describe what that looks like. And particularly in trying to communicate to the government about the importance of the industry itself, it's very hard to do that unless you can talk about what the industry looks like. What size is it? You know, how many people does it employ? How much is it exporting? You know, what is it worth to the Australian economy? Until you can answer those questions, it's very hard, particularly to get economists to take you at all seriously. So, you know, I think this is obviously not perfect. Unfortunately, the Australian Bureau of Statistics does not help us in collecting these numbers, but I think it's a reasonable attempt at trying to define what our capability is. And the more information that we unearth in the process of putting the roadmap together, you know, the better equipped we are to be answering questions. And look, I think I forgot to put it in the slides, but one of the things that we're particularly proud of as an achievement of Robotics Australia Group this year has been that for the first time ever, we are contributing to the International Federation of Robotics World Robot Statistics. So we had quite a few companies respond when we asked for figures on their robot sales. It's all kept anonymous, of course, but unfortunately at the global scale, Australia doesn't have too much of a profile, often because we're not reporting on the numbers of robots that we're building here. And so it's very hard for people to get an idea of the great work that is happening here if they don't know anything about it. So I mentioned some of the opportunities in terms of chapters, but obviously we would love for people to support us by, sponsoring the roadmap in different ways. We don't have a foundation sponsor for the roadmap yet. We're also looking at how people can put forward featured case studies and help us by sponsoring it in that way. Putting the roadmap together, comes at the cost of a lot of volunteer time. And so, actually accepting sponsorship is our way of trying to help to, reduce some of the costs that Robotics Australia Group puts out to be able to produce the roadmap. But it is also a very good marketing opportunity because this, and particularly if you're able to come in as a sponsor early, because that gives us more opportunity to shout from the rooftops that you are helping to contribute to us putting together particular chapters of the roadmap or indeed the roadmap itself. Now, I mentioned about, Robotics Australia Group and how our focus is on building this sustainable robotics industry. I guess what that looks like from our perspective is, and I guess I shouldn't have probably put the term venture capital there. Any sort of capital investment is actually beneficial to our local robotics industry. We would like to see more people working in robotics. We'd like to see more of our robotics companies exporting and scaling, getting bigger, and we'd like to see greater recognition in the community. And if we can start to see more of these things happening, then I think, as a group, Robotics Australia Group can feel that we've done our job, and that's our purpose in setting up, and these are the things that we want to see achieved. some of the things that we have managed to do so far, hopefully everyone will have noticed that robotics is finally on the national agenda. And so there is now a lot of talk about robotics. We've had multiple community building events. We're here today because we're going to be producing another version of the Robotics Roadmap. We do a lot of advocacy for members in terms of doing submissions to government on key issues, most recently on procurement. And we also try and make sure that we actually have a profile on the international stage. So we are a member of the International Alliance of Robotics Association of Women in Robotics. And we worked collaboratively with a Danish-based company called How to Robot to put together a report on the robotics capability in Australia as well, which I know the government has relied on. And speaking of the government, we are so chuffed to be able to, talk about the National Robotics Strategy, which we still don't know exactly when it will be released, but we know that the government has pretty much completed it. It always gives me a really warm, fuzzy feeling whenever I get an email now from the Department of Industry, because they actually have a robotics policy group. And the Robotics Roadmap has directly led to, and the development of Robotics Australia Group has directly led to there being a national robotics strategy. So I think that's something that we can all be very proud of, that we finally have robotics on the national agenda. It's not clear exactly how much the strategy will contribute to the further development of robotics and exactly what help that will be to the robotics industry. But the fact that we're on agenda is a great starting point, because once that strategy is released, then we have something that we can hold the government to account about and that we can build from. So I think it really is, what do they say, a watershed moment, and really very much looking forward to when that strategy will be released. Now, before I go into the actual process that we're going to go through to put the roadmap together, I'll just quickly tell you a little bit more about Robotics Australia Group, in case you're not too familiar with who we are. These are our Robotics Australia Group board. So all people who are very passionate about robotics and about the potential future of robotics in Australia. We also have recently formed a robotics council, which is really an advisory group that we hope to be able to lean on to help further the cause and really help to elevate the profile of the robotics industry in Australia. And then, of course, we have our fantastic Robotics Australia Network members. And because, as Nikki has said, our numbers are growing quite quickly, unfortunately, not everybody is recognised in these next two slides. But we do have a very growing list of our network members. And of course, when we communicate out with people, we have a whole bunch of more than 5,000 people, I think, who subscribe to our newsletter, who follow us on LinkedIn, and who are just generally, interested in how robotics is evolving in this country. So I think that's a really great start. And again, apologies for people who may have seen me present this before, but this image really sticks with me. And I think that it would be great if we could aspire to, like Canada, have robotics as part of the national consciousness. And in Canada, on their $5 bill, they actually have a picture of the Canadarm, which is a robotic arm that Canada produced that is used on the International Space Station. And clearly they feel so attached to this piece of robotics technology that they have put it on their currency. And I think that really, if at some point in the future we can have that same level of recognition of robotics in Australia, then that would be a great thing. But now I am aware that I haven't actually gone to how we're going to put the roadmap together. And that's where all of you who are participating in this webinar come in. The way that we're planning to put this together is very similar to the last version of the roadmap, where we will announce, so please subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on LinkedIn if you're not already doing these things. We will announce a webinar for each of the chapters, which tend to be sector-based, apart from chapters like integrators or the ones on trust and safety. And those chapters, we will have a 1-hour webinar from 12:30 to 1:30 on a day that, we will send you a schedule out of when those will occur. And we encourage you to attend those webinars that are of interest to you, with the idea of helping to contribute to answering, the key questions that really underpin each of the chapters of the roadmap. So first off, we'll be actually reflecting on what it is about that sector or chapter that is unique, that we would really like the reader to come away with, to understand what are the current challenges that are facing that sector. And then we're going to be looking at how robotics can help to address these challenges, and also how robotics is potentially already helping. So we will be looking for examples of how robotics is being used in the sector. If we can't find many examples in Australia, we'll also be looking a bit further afield to see in general, are there interesting things happening in the other parts of the world that we could be learning from. And then we'll really have a bit of more of a brainstorming session on what the future of robotics could look like in terms of that sector or the particular topic of the chapter, where we can be a bit more speculative about, if the technology develops, in a particular way, what are the problems that we're going to be able to solve in the future for that particular sector. So once we have done that, then we will go away, we'll take the findings from that webinar and we will write them up into a chapter. And then with the aim that we hope to have the roadmap finished so that we can release it in early 2025. So please watch this space. We will let you know when these webinars are going to be held. And you can just sign up to attend them in exactly the same way that you've attended this webinar today. We welcome all of your contributions. The other thing that I should mention is that if you do have a case study that you would like to contribute, you can just automatically do that. You don't have to worry if you're not able to attend an information session. If you go to the Robotics Australia Group website, which is RoboAusNet, I better flick to the next. There's our contact details. If you go to our website, you can already upload case studies for consideration for inclusion in the roadmap. We try and encourage the content to not be overly advertorial. It's really about describing the technology that's been developed and how it is providing a solution, but it's also a great opportunity to profile, your company or your particular technology and give people an idea of what it is, what it can do, which is why we're also offering, you can submit a case study, but, if you can find your way to supporting us, then, we would recommend that you actually make it a featured case study. And then that will just mean that we highlight it more strongly in the roadmap. And as I said, that will help us to be able to continue the work that we're doing, advocating for robotics in Australia and producing things like this roadmap, which I can tell you really did have quite a strong influence on the development of the National Robotics Strategy, because we were able to very quickly say, oh, okay, so this is how robotics is having an influence here. And, this is the background information that describes why that's important and how this is developed here. So really that's an overview of how the next roadmap is going to come together. And I think, Nikki, we can now open this up for questions.
Right, thanks, Sue. Besides the question that we've already, Hasif, I will email you directly with just your inquiries of robotics and your next question that you asked there. Sue, do you know, Amanda asked whether the ATO is now acknowledging mechatronics engineering in the list of recognized occupations. I'm not aware of it, but have you heard about that?
I don't think so. We could ask the question of the department, but I don't think that has happened, no.
Okay, and Elliot, thanks for your question. With the use of the Slack channel, I'll have a look at it and advise, and if we are, then we'll obviously make that available to everyone to use. Are there any other questions? Let's just have a look there. Not that we can see.
Oh, we've provided a list of the chapters, and you'll see we haven't, some that aren't included there that we're considering are arts and entertainment and sports and potentially emergency response. But integrators is listed in that. And look, we're open to suggestions as well. So if you think that we're missing something, then yes, please let us know.
It's great to see a lot of our network members here today. Don't know if I can do a bit of a shout out for them. Ashley, hi. Brenton, hi. Colin, Damath. Oh, Damath, the Elliot. Not all network members, but great supporters of Robotics Australia Group. Elliot's got a question. Has anyone considered making the roadmap online, not
Yes,
PDF?
every time, Elliot. It's not as simple to do. Yes, it's definitely been considered. It's not something that we have had the resources to be able to do, though. I guess the other issue with doing that is is having to keep it updated. So what we do is that we did have it closed down for a while, but we were accepting case studies pretty much at any time during the year. And we did actually include some additional case studies when the Department of Industry was asking for some feedback and some material to help them in putting the National Robotics Strategy together. So that is our main way of being able to let people add new content, at least in the form of case studies. But yeah, no, we haven't got the resources at the moment to do a full online version of the roadmap. Yeah, wikis are good. We could possibly do one of those flip books, but that might be as far as we can go. Oh, yeah, Andrew, that's a really good point around how AI can be integrated. And I wonder whether we might be able to include that in the robotics capability chapter, because it is such a fast moving, thing at the moment. But I think some examination of the impact of, generative AI on robotics and how, people are starting to integrate that into robotic technology is definitely very important. So yeah, no, thanks for raising that. It's a really good point.
This is your opportunity, people, to ask questions. You've got us here, so ask away.
And I'm just going to add, Andrew, that, like AI and robotics are increasingly, robotics really is a subset of artificial intelligence. I mean, there are some robots that are not intelligent, but they are becoming increasingly rare. And I think sometimes people think that the people who build robots are like your blue collar workers that just put the metal stuff together, and that then some clever person comes along with the artificial intelligence and puts the brain in. And, nothing could be further from the truth. In developing a robot, you're also having to, give it its intelligence and think about, what it needs to be able to know, to be able to do the task that it's been given. So it really is an integral part of robotics. And so I think there sometimes is a very artificial split. Artificial, that's the wrong word. But, sometimes people draw a dividing line between AI and robotics that doesn't actually exist. And AI is not done separately to the people who are putting the robots together and creating them.
Now the questions are coming in fast and furious. So Sue, I'll just let you timeline. Costa, Manning.
Oh, Ash Ashley's just asked a question about, do we have a list of when each chapter webinar will be run? We do not, Ashley, but we will. And we will be circulating that probably next week.
Costa's question, the timeline, Sue?
The timeline is that we hope to have all of the webinars completed by the end of August. And then there'll be, quite a lot of background work putting everything together. But we aim to release the roadmap in the beginning of 2025. And I tell people the reason that we need to do this is because, unfortunately, if we were to release a 2024 roadmap in December, by the time January comes along, people are very unforgiving and they'll say, well, that roadmap, that's out of date. That was last year. So to really maximize the opportunity, we need to release the roadmap as close to the beginning of the year as possible, if that makes sense.
And Costa's the last 2 years, so we're updating the 2022 one.
Yes, well, obviously we'll rely on some of the information in 2022 if possible. I'd encourage anyone who put in case studies for either the 2018 or 2022 roadmap to please update them and resubmit them. Jason has asked, does the roadmap address new distribution systems such as RAS, Robots as a Service? I'm just trying to remember whether we addressed that in 2022, but there's no reason that we don't, Jason. And again, perhaps that's something that we really need to include in that first chapter on robotics capability. So I'll just take a note of that now, but that's a really good suggestion. Thank you.
Hi, Nicola. In answer to your question, yes, this webinar will be available on the website.
Interoperability or standards alignment across domains applications. That was very broadly covered in trust and safety. But again, I think that's something that we could put in the very first chapter on robotics capability. Certainly we covered that in the 2018 roadmap pretty explicitly, but a lot has changed since then. So I think that would be a good opportunity. Does trust and safety cover ethics? Yes, it does.
So we've got some questions in the question and answer tabs as well. I'll let you answer that. Is anyone,
okay.
It's okay, I'll read them to you. Is anyone in Australia yet making arm robots, like industrial robots? I see they're talking about cobots. So Anonymous, I hope that's what you're talking about.
That's a very good question. And maybe one of our participants might know the answer. As far as I'm aware, unless you are 3D printing your robot arm, then the answer is no. That's not 100% true. They're not in manufacture yet, but there is a company in Brisbane called Converge, which is doing medical robots, which is looking at manufacturing robot arms, but I'm not sure how much of the components are all sourced here in Australia versus compiled. So yeah, watch this space. I think there is probably likely to be a demand for some of those, depending on the use case, being developed here in Australia. And then the second question here is there an opportunity to include questions for the industry chapters that explore future insights, things like school programs, school shortfalls, education, upskilling? Yes, please send us through any questions that you have on those things, and we'll see if we can include them in the webinar. Yes, and Amanda's just saying from an OEM point of view, not yet for robot arms. Yep, agreed. Oh, and Nicola has suggested maybe we could have an international global perspective after listening to one of your podcasts, Nikki, the one with Bern Grush. So yeah, that's a really interesting idea. So leave that one with us.
Thanks, Nicola. Any other questions?
Oh, sorry, I'm just looking at some of the answered questions, and Colin Thomas has asked, where would component/control systems developers be included in the roadmap? Probably the closest would be in integrators, Colin. So I think that, we haven't actually tried to come up with a definition of what the integrators chapter will include, but our default position is that we make it as inclusive as possible. So that could be a good space for it. Oh, I'm seeing, sorry, you added some extra information there, Colin, that chapter for automation component manufacturers. Yeah, okay, I see where you're going. Yes, because they're part of the supply chain. Interesting. Okay. Let me think about that, Colin. That's a really good point. Whether we could have that as part of the integrators. Now, I should mention too that, we're putting out there what we think, where we think there is demand for chapters. And it might be, depending on the amount of material that we gather from the webinars, that we decide that we might have to, collapse some chapters in with other chapters. Or we might decide that, for example, logistics has traditionally been part of our services chapter. We might go, wow, there's so much happening in that space. We really need, there's so much content, we need it to be its own separate chapter. So yeah, automation component manufacturers, I think that's an interesting point, whether we separate that out, as a chapter in its own right, or whether we can include it with one of the others. But yeah, thank you for that. Oh, and another question on waste management sorting. Waste management typically comes under the services chapter. But yeah, again, everyone's coming up with some of the edge cases at the moment, which can always be challenging. I should explain that the original chapter structure and the one that we are following, although we have, evolved a little bit, has purely been done to follow the way the Australian government splits up the Australian economy. So, services is a huge chapter, but that's actually how the Australian government defines the different parts of our economy. So that has some influence on how we put it together. Waste management falls broadly within services, but yeah, rather than resources.
Colin's got one. Are there any upcoming international competitions that Australia will soon be competing in?
Oh, I'm sure there are. It's really hard to keep up to date with all of the different opportunities that people have in terms of competitions. Nothing's coming up in my mind immediately, but that doesn't mean that there's not probably a lot happening. Is there a specific reason that you're interested in that, Colin? I mean, I know of some that have just finished not so long ago. There was a challenge that a couple of our universities were involved in with lunar rovers. There was also a recent underwater AUV challenge, which again, I know at least one of our universities was competing in. And I'm sure that there are, a lot of the school competitions like VEX Robotics, go all the way up to national level and then international level. So I just don't know exactly what the time frame is for some of those competitions as well. Yeah, so Jeff's just asked a question about whether fruit inspection and picking is one of the key industries with Robotics Australia Group. Yeah, we tend to cover that in agriculture, although strictly speaking, that also moves into manufacturing in terms of food production. But yeah, that will be dealt with in the agriculture sector. Yeah, no, Andrew, I like your thinking. We might have already had this conversation, but I'm a firm believer that all of the decarbonisation plans that companies are starting to make sure that they're meeting their obligations to head towards net zero are really lacking if they don't include automation, because automation is an obvious way to be able to optimize a lot of the outcomes of using technology that like electric conversion to electric from traditional fuel sources would always benefit from automation in terms of the refueling, or in terms of optimizing the way that the system is run. Yes, I'll have to have a bit of a think about how we could include that, but that's a good point.
Just further up, Sue, Nicola, component chapter would be worthwhile. Control systems or sensor payload development, drones chapter. Yeah, I had a case done in 2022.
Yep. Sorry, just taking some notes. Oh, Elliot, that's a big question. How do we respond to the Prime Minister's Future Made in Australia and the need to adopt robotics in Australian industry? Look, I think it's always very useful to have a conversation with people to reinforce that adoption and creation of technology is different, and that both are important, but that we shouldn't fund one and not fund the other, if that makes sense. And I think that sometimes people broadly think of funding to help the adoption of robotics as broadly helping the robotics industry, whereas I guess Robotics Australia Group's position is that we would like to see a more nuanced understanding of what it takes to help support the people who are making technologies versus the people who are adopting technology. So both are important, but they also need to, and have quite different needs in terms of the support that the government can offer them. So they do need to be considered a bit separately. Well, if there are no, here we go. Automated manufacturing facilities in solar. Yes, climate change. Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities for more use of robotics in the same push that we're having for renewable energy as well as decarbonisation. Yeah, I encourage everyone to look out for the webinars, the chapter specific webinars as they come online, and sign up, and we welcome your contributions. Remember that you can also contribute case studies to the roadmap directly via our website, and we encourage you to consider sponsoring aspects of the roadmap as you feel able, because it really does help to sustain our work as the peak body for robotics in Australia, and allows us to be able to do activities like this roadmap. So thank you, everyone. Nikki, I'll hand
Just
to you.
Thanks, Colin. Just in terms of events around the country as part of RAG benefits. So next week at the Sydney Build Expo, network members have actually been invited to come and share our space with us there. That's a huge RAG benefit. So anyone in Sydney next week, welcome to come and say hello to us. We already had a meetup in Adelaide this year, so we will be expanding this to other states for the rest of the year, hopefully at least make one state. And I'm not sure if Adelaide's going to be there again, but you can always fly up to Sydney, Colin. I think that's it from we just short of 1:30, so everyone can still go and grab something to, thanks Amanda, to go and have something for lunch. And we'll be doing updates on our LinkedIn page, as Sue has mentioned, and on our newsletter. So please do make sure to follow us there. And I think that's all for today. Thanks, Sue, and thank you to everyone for attending and your interest and your support.
Thank you.
Thank you.